Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is a clematis, and it's one of the late flowering clematis, which means that it doesn't produce any flowers at all until June, and sometimes not till late June, but will go on producing a mass of small, beautiful flowers right into late summer and sometimes into autumn. And it produces all those flowers on new wood, which means that you can prune it right down to the ground. And then you'll get new growth, all of which will bear flowers. Whereas if you leave it, all you'll get is progressively more and more brown, seemingly dead growth low down, and then a few flowers high up as the new growth gets higher and higher. So we'll take this right down here. I'm going really low. So I've just got about 6 inches of growth left. Now clematis really likes to have plenty of moisture. So when you've pruned it, mulch it thickly. Apart from anything else, as well as feeding it, that will keep the moisture in the soil. And if you're planting new clematis, add lots of nice loose fibrous compost or whatever you've got, and that will hold the water and the roots can get in there. Apart from that, there's nothing you need to do. This will grow. You try stopping it. It'll grow and it will flower and it will look glorious. On today's programme, Sue goes to Hidcote in Gloucestershire in search of inspiration for her new hop borders.
Wow, Lottie, this is a riot of red, and it's not too overwhelming.
They are definitely looking fantastic.
We visit a kitchen garden near Whitby on the North York Moors, where the no-dig method yields an array of unusual veg.
This is actually a cucumber, believe it or not. Not your standard cucumber, but it's a lemon cucumber. But it's actually a burpless variety, so if you struggle to digest cucumbers, this one's a good one for you.
Carol is in her own garden in Devon, and this year she'll be showing us how she grows plants for free.
I suppose I've sowed thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds, and you know, I get still exactly the same excitement every time I sow some seeds. It's a miracle, it's beautiful.
And I shall be planting up shallots and getting my dahlias out of storage and checking through them. Good boy. Although I've got rid of almost all the box in the garden, except for in the pots in the cricket pitch, I haven't in any way lost my enthusiasm for topiary and clipped, trained plants that will give evergreen structure in winter, and also something that you can set against the informality of summer planting. You need that balance. I've been looking for something that I could put here in the writing garden that will give it a little bit of winter structure, but also relate to the theme of the garden, which is about looseness and lightness. And having had an exhaustive look at all the options, the plant that I've chosen to shape and trim and use here is privet. Now privet, rightly or wrongly, has a pretty unglamorous image. And we've all seen hedges that have been allowed to grow out and they get bare at the bottom and a little bit top heavy on the top. But if it's clipped regularly and if it's looked after, it actually makes a very good hedge and a nice dense one. And this variety, which is Ligistrum delaveanum, has slightly smaller leaves and therefore has a denser shape if you clip it regularly. This is a lollipop on a half standard. Now half standards are shorter than standards, so if you get a standard, you'd probably be up there about 6 foot tall with the head. And the lollipop head will float in amongst the planting around it. And for half the year, it'll almost look like a giant allium, just adding a contrast to the soft shapes around it. Now, when it comes to planting, privet's very accommodating. As long as the drainage is not too bad, it'll grow in full sun, it'll grow in shade, it'll take a certain amount of wet, and it'll take quite a lot of dry. It's a very tough plant. So, let's get it in the ground. As with any tree or shrub, plant it slightly proud. Don't plant it too deep. But I just want to see where we are. That's about right. Okay, let's take it out. Now looking at the roots, that's lovely. It's not root bound. You can see the roots. Perfect. At this stage, the thing to do is to break up the bottom of the hole. And that gives the roots a chance to get down and also to improve the drainage. I'm also breaking the side of the hole so that the roots can go sideways. Don't add any goodness underneath it. All you'll do is encourage the roots to stay in that hole. And what you want them to do is to grow out into the soil. So we'll pop that in. And you see that that's slightly proud of the surface of the ground. Perfect. Right, at this stage, I want to make sure it's upright and also heel it in so it's nice and firm. Now, what you have to do when you plant any woody shrub or tree, particularly at this time of year when it's growing, and it doesn't matter if it's going to rain or has been raining, is water it. Give it a good soak. And I think this and the other pair that I've got on the other side will look really good. These green heads floating in amongst a sea of white flowers, umbellifers that are soft and loose, and all the other shades of green around them. And then in winter, they'll give a little bit more structure. Now, last August, Sue went to Gloucestershire to visit Lawrence Johnson's great garden, Hidcote. And she was looking for particular advice and inspiration that she could then take home and apply to her own garden.
Visiting gardens at this time of year with their fantastic late summer planting schemes is a must for me. It shows me how to develop my own borders. I've got a couple of areas in my garden that need a bit of a rejig. I want to be more creative, make more of an impact, and choose plants that are going to take me through to autumn. So I've come to the National Trust Garden of Hidcote. Completed in the 1920s and influenced by the arts and crafts movement. It's a garden of small rooms, each with their own atmosphere and plenty of cottage garden planting, as well as brilliant colour schemes to stimulate new ideas. I love white plants. I find them so calming in the garden. And I've created a strip in my lawn that has got lovely white plants in the spring, but I need some plants to take the border into late summer. And I've got a lot of lovely choice here. I can see they've got the phloxes with their lovely bright green leaves. They're hardy, and the additional thing they give you is scent. So at night you can go around the garden and have these sort of lanterns of light and this delicious perfume. Behind them are these spires of Veronicastrum virginicum album, and they look, I think, like candelabras, and they're absolutely packed with bees. If I had to take just one plant away with me, it would be the Veronicastrum. There are so many treats here to tempt me, but I need to focus on the main reason why I'm here. I'm redesigning part of my garden. I've removed some large plants. It's a bit of a building site at the moment, but I will be left with 3 borders. I normally plant for my own delight, but this time I'm planting for my husband, who likes bold colours. I don't feel quite confident in choosing the plants, so I've come here to educate myself. I'm told there is one border here which will have just what I'm looking for, and head gardener Lottie Allen has joined me to give me some advice. Wow, Lottie, this is a riot of red, and it's not too overwhelming.
No, it's the perfect time of year to see the red borders. From now on, they're looking fantastic.
And over here, there's a group of bright, vibrant reds. That lobelia with its lovely red stem, I thought it needed really moist soil.
This is Queen Victoria. We bring them on every year, so we tend to bring a few on in the glass house in case we get very cold weather, but the rest come up as perennials. And the soil is moist, it's a good fertile soil, but I wouldn't say it's damp in that sense, and it seems to work quite well here. One of my favourites actually is Salvia Royal Bumble. It's this one here.
Well, that's rather pretty.
It's a fantastic one and really full of flower.
And behind you, I can just see, look at this beautiful clematis. And it looks so wonderful against the cotinus, doesn't it? And the lobelia stems. What's that one?
This is a Viticella, but it's Kermesiana. And this crawls up through the cotinus and takes itself and really sort of moulds itself into the borders. And you get a bit of texture and the foliage as well as the colour as it runs through the different plants.
That is an absolutely fantastic use of clematis. I'm so taking that idea on board.
This is another great combination of plants that we've used in the red borders, things like the potentilla, which is monarch's velvet.
I've just bought a potentilla. Is it worth deadheading?
I think it is. They're kind of multi-headed, so it's quite difficult to do little bits in between, but I think once each head has gone, to take them back is worth it.
So the persicaria, it's pink, I think.
Someone's pink is another's red, isn't it?
It is. So you've got all these tones, haven't you, of sort of reds almost to purples, and the use of shrubs at the back, you know, really is a great foil, isn't it, for the green and the little pops of persicaria flowers.
Definitely. With the persicaria or bistorta, that colour is almost very close to the berberis, isn't it? So those two kind of bring those together, and then with the bronze leaves of the dahlias.
I really love the reddy red of the crocosmia and the limey green leaves, but so often you see them flop over. These are not floppy.
No, these aren't floppy. It's probably a good shout for you. This is Hellfire. It's a lot shorter than the Lucifer, which is the very big tall one, which does tend to flop. But this one, yeah, does keep itself quite well.
And behind it, you've added a bit of height here, haven't you, with the lovely sambucus. I've killed 3 already. What's your secret?
I'm not sure. I think maybe you've got very dry soils, and maybe this is slightly more moist. It's a reasonable fertile soil. It's been gardened for a long time and probably does hold a bit more moisture than
So if I
your
find
soils.
a moist position, and perhaps with a little bit of shade,
Yeah.
I'm going to try again because they're so structurally beautiful. I'm wondering whether I could introduce some more orangey hues into the red scheme at home to make it a little bit more uplifting. This is a really exhilarating border, full of oranges and yellows. And I can see here the butterfly weed. It's not too tall, and I've got an area in my new border that I want to keep a lower plant. It's easy to grow from seed, so that's going to keep the cost down for me. Behind them are the agaranthemums, and these are tender perennials. You can get many different colours on this, so I might be able to sort of go for a slightly deeper red colour that will tie everything together. And we've got the pop of the verbena here, which sort of really brings together, though it's completely contrasting, it really highlights the yellows and oranges. And over here is something quite different to all these blousy plants. This is called a cufia, or a cigar plant, and it's named that way because the little flowers are like lit cigars, but it combines red with yellow. That's what I'm trying to do. This might be a key plant in the border. behind it is a very special plant to me. My father used to say every time he left me, we only part to meet again. And that's taken from the poem Black-Eyed Susan. And Rebecca's are also known as Black-Eyed Susan. So I really want to have them in my new border to remind me of him. I think this has given me a bit of an idea of how I can not just keep it red, but maybe take it into orange and yellow as well. So I'm quite pleased because I find this quite uplifting over here.
Most of the colour at this stage of spring is focused here in the spring garden. And we're just grateful for whatever we can get. We don't try and curate it in any way. So from that first snowdrop in January to the last tulip in May, we're happy for it to be random and jumbled. But of course it does always have the same palette. You have the yellows of the daffodils, and then the smoky pastel colours of the hellebores and the blues of the pulmonaria and the muscaria and the scillas coming through. And what I would say to Sue when you're establishing a hot border is go easy on the red. Red can suck in light and rather flatten colours, but I'm sure Sue will discover all of this, and creating a border using colour as a theme is a really good way to go about things. I prepared this bed more in hope than expectation, because I've got shallots I want to plant out, but it's been so wet I thought that it wouldn't work. But actually we've had a couple of dry days, and because they're raised beds, they drain well, so I think I can put these straight out. They don't like sitting in too wet, cold ground, so if you haven't got any space on your allotment or in your garden ready, you can put them into plugs. Put each individual shallot into a plug, half bury it, put it somewhere warm, and then when you see good strong shoots appearing and perhaps the roots at the bottom of the plug, they can be transplanted outside where you want them to grow when the ground is ready. I've got two varieties this year. We've got a round variety, which is Meloine. It's said to be resistant to downy mildew, which, if the weather continues its trend toward being sort of warm and wet, then that is very useful. You sow them in exactly the same way as onion sets. You simply just push them into the ground so they're half covered. And I'm going to space them about that far apart. That's plenty close enough. And the great thing about shallots as opposed to onions is that they're sweeter and they store better. And they're smaller. And the other big difference is that shallots will form a cluster of small bulbs rather than one big one. Ned has found in the garden this very, very beautiful yellow ball. Can I just see it? Oh, it's lovely. Not only is it yellow, but it's bouncy. And that's made Ned very happy. Good boy. The other variety I've got is more familiar. It's a Longor, and the name is connected to the shape. It's torpedo shaped, so it's long and slim, and they're very tasty, very good, and they're reliable. If you haven't got raised beds and you've got heavy soil, it is quite a good idea to add a little bit of grit or sand to it, and obviously plenty of organic matter, just to make sure that drainage is good. Now, the biggest problem over the coming weeks are birds. So if you come out in the morning and you see them scattered on the ground, it's because birds have pulled them up. And if that happens, what I do is I put some fleece over the top, peg it down and leave it until you can see green shoots. And if there are green shoots, that means there are roots. And if there are roots, then they're anchored into the ground and then they'll be fine. And then these should be ready to harvest round about July time. I've been growing veg all my life, but we went to North Yorkshire to visit somebody who has created a new veg plot as part of a big change in his life.
I'm Jamie, I'm head grower here at Raithwaite Sands End. Growing seeds, being out in the garden, being out in nature has definitely changed the way in which I live. Much more peaceful, I suppose. Gardening's definitely changed my perspective on everything, really. I was a sales manager that went to business school, was a very different person at that point. So I swapped the suit for a fine art studio. I was inspired a lot by the natural world, and that then led me into a collaboration with a garden designer for one of the RHS shows, and I did some of the murals, and he did obviously the garden design, and that was my kind of first foray into gardening. So the kitchen garden is around 900 square metres in total, 3 50-foot polytunnels. It's on a north-facing hill, about 30 degrees. We still grow a large variety of things that you wouldn't necessarily grow, like Aztec broccoli, tons of different varieties of tomato, courgette. We try and grow interesting varieties that you wouldn't necessarily find in a shop. The garden was set up with the soil health as the kind of primary concern. And because of that, the best way I know of to cultivate healthy soil is utilising the no-dig method. That process, essentially, you would mulch the ground with a medium such as compost, and you wouldn't till it into the soil. You just add a mulching layer, which then feeds the soil life, and then in turn the soil life help feed the plants and create a symbiosis with them, which is what we're aiming to cultivate. Just over a year ago, this entire hill was just a muddy lawn, essentially. So it's a pretty young garden, and we've only been set up about a year, and we've definitely had challenges throughout that year. But I think, all in all, I'm pretty happy with how the season's gone and what we've managed to produce. So this is horizontally, or Aztec broccoli, and it's slightly different to its namesake, broccoli, because it's far more prolific. It originates from Mexico, and it was used by the ancient Aztecs as a ceremonial plant. It's one of those plants that you can just pop in and not really have to worry about. No pests seem to like it. I haven't found one that likes it. The more you pick, the more you get. As it matures, it turns red, and the leaves turn red as well. Both the seed heads and the leaves are edible. It's kind of like a cross between spinach and broccoli. But the leaves are far more robust when they're cooked than spinach. So all in all, it's a great plant that I would definitely recommend growing. So prolific, and no pests like it, so that's always a plus in my book. So we've really struggled with wireworm this year, and that's because we've essentially mulched out that grass layer, and click beetles, which is the adult, they lay their eggs within lawns or dense vegetation, and then you cover that over with your mulch layer. And when the larvae hatch, they're called wireworms, and the only thing that they have to eat is the roots that you're planting, because you've mulched away the roots of the vegetation underneath. So you don't actually know you've got a problem until your plant's dead and gone. So there's a couple of things you can do. The easiest thing is a decoy or a trap crop, something like a radish, which is fast growing, or just popping in potatoes around the area. If it's really, really bad, just sow the mustard thickly in the bed, let that grow, and then incorporate it just in the top layer of the soil. So I love growing carrots, but they can be quite tricky to get to germinate and to grow. And then once they're growing, a common pest problem is carrot root fly. So I found that if you interplant carrots with onions, because the onions have a stronger scent, they actually mask the scent of the carrots. So I haven't had an issue with carrot fly once because of that. So let's try harvesting one. A quick tip that I've learned is that if you push your carrot down, it kind of breaks the airtight seal around your carrot and saves you snapping them. And I've learned that through a lot of snapped carrots. quite a nice carrot. So one of my favourite aspects of being in the garden is obviously harvesting. I feel there's something quite profound in taking a seed to a plant and then a plant to a crop and then maybe taking seed from that plant and then replanting it and seeing that whole process. So this is one of my favourite tomatoes I've grown this year. Blue fire vine. Starts off deep blue and then ends up this kind of reddy, purpley colour with golden stripes. It's a really attractive tomato and it's also very tasty, which always helps. So we have our leek flower heads here. The flowers have now turned to seed, more or less. Leek seed is one of those things you have to be quite patient for. It takes 2 years to be able to save seed from leeks. They're lovely big pom-poms on big stems and the pollinators love them. They can't get enough of them whilst they're in flower. I think that leeks are sometimes undervalued. I love growing leeks because they're great to eat, but also they're very ornamental in the garden in the second year. It's also like a little maraca in the garden if you give it a shake. You can hear all those seeds rattling around. So this is quite an interesting one. This is actually a cucumber, believe it or not. Not your standard cucumber, but it's a lemon cucumber. Texture is very similar to a standard cucumber, although the seeds are slightly larger. And it has these slight hairs that I usually rub off before eating. But it's actually a birthless variety, so if you struggle to digest cucumbers, this one's a good one for you. And the harvest basket wouldn't be complete without a few edible flowers. So we've got some nasturtium in there. And this is our late summer harvest from here on the northeast coast. Pretty happy with that harvest. It's been a very challenging location, a very challenging kind of garden setup, but that extra challenge adds to the sense of achievement, I suppose. I just try to steward it the best way I can, and yeah, I'm really proud of it.
Well, I confess that Aztec broccoli is a new one on me. And I know that part of the world quite well, and I know just how fierce it can be up there in the weather. And to grow good vegetables on a north-facing site in that location takes real skill and dedication. Now, this is dogwood, or cornus. This is Cornus sibirica. And it has this fantastic intense colour to its bark, which is at its best between about January and now. And you can just see that the new foliage is just beginning to emerge, and that's the perfect moment to prune it. And the reason why you prune it is to encourage more new growth, because the younger the growth, the brighter the colour. I normally cut these back every other year. I'm cutting back to the established framework. Now, of course, you don't have to do that. I could cut it back up here, but then you would get growth coming from the stem. So what I try and do is keep a basic framework from which all new growth will emerge. It looks brutal, but trust me, that will grow back very quickly, and this time next year have that really intense colour. And all these shoots here will make good hardwood cuttings. But actually the best material comes if you've got something about the thickness of a pencil. A shoot like that, for example, we can take the top off. Now, I could push all that in the ground and that would do, but actually it will make two really nice cuttings. So we can go one there, and then we'll just take the top off that. You can just push those in the ground where you want them to grow, and there's a very high chance that they will root and grow without any trouble at all. So, if I wanted a new plant here, just push that in like that, so it's about halfway buried. The only thing to remember is make sure that the top part is up. And so what I do is the bottom I cut at an angle and the top I cut flat.
There we go.
Now, still to come on today's programme. Carol shows us how to fill a new border as cheaply as possible.
We're going to grow together absolutely masses of plants for next to nothing.
And we visit a garden on the coast to meet a gardener who's not afraid to be bold with his plant choices.
I get to a point where I no longer buy plants that should work in my coastal environment. I buy plants I like. And in my world, plants have got two choices, they sink or swim.
But first, we're going to visit one of your gardens in Berkshire.
Hello, my name is Alison and I've had an allotment plot for over 17 years. For me, it's all about the space. For me, in some ways, this is my garden. I'm a little bit unorthodox. I place sweet corn next to roses, French beans next to sunflowers, and my current record is 50 pumpkins, which I managed to fit into my two-seater car. What I can explain today is how to create your own cupcake wall. Not made of real cupcakes, of course, but cosmos. I love the way the sun catches them like an uplighter. So first you need to till the land. You need to section out the area with string, or if you've already marked it out, with weed fabric. Empty all the seeds into a little trug like this, because if you're going to spend, you know, at least about 4 to 6 packets of seeds, then you're in more control if they're in the tub. Then you mix it into a larger trug full of vermiculite, and then you sprinkle onto the land evenly. But so the birds don't have them as a delightful snack, use some upcycled netting. There you go, my Cosmos cupcake wall. Thank you so much for coming to my allotment plot today. Bye for now.
Well, thank you, Alison. I think the cosmos looks fantastic, but then I think all cosmos looks fantastic. It's one of my favourite plants. Now, in amongst this newspaper and cardboard box, I've got dahlias. And at this time of year, it's a good idea to get dahlias out of store. Now, this is David Howard, which is one of those wonderful dahlias with bronze foliage and has orange flowers, but just slightly touched with peachy colour. They're absolutely superb. And we store our dahlias because we've tried leaving them in the ground, but the combination of our wet soil, heavy rainfall, and bouts of extreme cold is disastrous. And so we lose more than half of them. So we lift them all before the first frost, clean them off, cut back the tops, and store them. So if we take these out, and what I'm looking for is to see that they're not too dry and not soggy. Now that's good. I'm feeling to see that they're firm, because if they're at all squidgy, I want to remove that tuber, but that's fine, it's healthy. So what I'm now going to do with this is pot it up, protect it from frost and gradually harden it off. So by about mid-May, we can plant them into the garden with foliage that's about that tall, which means that they will flower earlier and are off to a nice strong start. Now, I've got an old pot. This is quite a big pot, but it's a big set of tubers. The compost wants to have reasonably good drainage, but any peat-free compost will do the job. So we'll pop a little bit underneath it, like that. Stick the tubers on, and the idea is to have it so it's below the surface. It doesn't have to be too deep, but just covered like that. And of course, really importantly, label it. So I will water that, and that will start to throw up shoots quite slowly, probably in about a month's time. And then once it does get going, it'll grow quite fast. Now we're going to Devon to join Carol in her own garden for the first of a series of visits, where she is going to show us how to propagate a wide range of plants to fill a border for free.
One of the pleasures of gardening for me is growing your own plants. I've been doing it for as long as I can remember. This garden is just stacked with plants, and almost all of them I've grown myself, from seeds, from division, from cuttings. And just occasionally I've actually invested in a couple of packets of seed of something really, really special. But the great thing is, when they grow on and flower and set their own seed, I can collect that too. Now this year, I want to share with you all the different ways there are to produce new plants and fill your gardens with them. And what's more, all those plants are for free. Seed is just such a miraculous thing, isn't it? And all we're doing when we sow our seed is emulating nature, really. I'm starting with seed, but I'm going to be doing all sorts of propagating right through the year. And I hope you'll propagate alongside me and we can compare notes and see how things are getting on, and we're going to grow together absolutely masses of plants for next to nothing. So this is what I'm going to start off with. This is a cosmos, it's Cosmos Purity. I absolutely love this. It's an annual, so it'll grow, flower, on and on, right the way into the autumn, and then it'll die. But before that, I'll have saved some of the seeds so we can grow some more next year. So all I'm going to do is surface sow it. It's a huge temptation to sow the lot, but don't. Sow it as sparsely as you possibly can, so there's plenty of room in between for each seedling to actually develop. I'm using seed trays, but you can use anything at all as long as it's got some holes in the bottom. So stuff like this, fruit punnets, absolutely ideal. Although this is plants for free, it really is worth investing in a bag of seed compost. Don't be tempted to use your own compost, because it's full of pathogens. Pathogens are organisms that can cause disease. You need to start off with sterile compost to grow strong, healthy seedlings. So what is it about seed compost that's so wonderful? It's very, very free draining. At the same time, it retains adequate moisture to keep your seeds going. And it's very, very low in nutrient, because those seedlings really don't need any of that at all. All they've got to do in there is germinate, send down their roots, put up their first shoots, their first true leaves, and then you're going to be moving them on into something else. Now, I know there are all sorts of jokes made about me and grit, but it's an absolutely wonderful substance. It helps drainage, and the seeds can see the light. And then I'm going to use this. Well, you can use another seed tray. If you're sowing in a pot, use another pot. And just press it down, gently but firmly, to make sure that those seeds are in intimate contact with the compost. Really vital. Then I'm going to lower this seed tray into some shallow water and then put it in a nice bright place. Now everybody says, well, it's all right for you because you've got a greenhouse, but it doesn't matter. My mum used to grow thousands of seeds and she always just put them on the kitchen windowsill. In fact, she used to run out of space sometimes and go into the living room too. I can remember being a little girl and my mum was really excited and she grabbed me by the hand and she pressed these seeds into my hand and she showed me how to make a little hole and push one in and then just smooth the soil over the top. A couple of weeks later, she took me out again and magically there were these pairs of round leaves. I suppose I've sowed thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds since. And you know, I get still exactly the same excitement every time I sow some seeds. It's a miracle, it's beautiful. Now Now, this was a wreath that I made for Christmas. It didn't look quite like this then. We had all sorts of things in here, but one of the most spectacular things we had were these eryngiums. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous perennial, this. It's lovely in foliage, it's beautiful in flower. It's Eryngium bourgatii, it's a sea holly, and I'm hoping we can get a load of seed from it. Look at all that seed! Isn't that exciting? You know it's going to happen, you hope it's going to happen, but when it happens, it's just splendid. Oh, just to feel the sunshine on your face, you just feel as though everything's alive and everything's started. The joys of spring. Well, that method of surface sowing and then sprinkling with grit is great for almost all seeds. But if you're dealing with big seeds, then you can do something called station sowing. So the idea is that each seed gets its own individual compartment. And the great advantage of that is that when you come to move those plants on, instead of having to lever them out of the seed tray, you can just push them out and plant the whole thing out, which means there's no root disturbance. So this is an ideal method for really big seed, like sweet peas, chard. Now, I've had these module trays for 40 years or so, and every single year I've sown into them. So although they're plastic, they really have been recycled over and over again. But why not do this if you just want a few plants, or get a load of them if you want lots and lots of sweet peas? Because that's what I'm going to sow. That is just bits of cardboard stuck in here, and it will keep those individual plants quite separate until the time they're planted out. All you do is put your seed on the top and then just push it in. So it's maybe a centimetre or so under the surface there. And it's got all the makings of a new plant. There you are, you're all tucked in. In a few weeks' time, we can check on our seeds, and then I'll show you the next step, pricking them out. I'm also going to show you how to get even more plants for free by dividing them, the art of pulling plants apart. We'll also learn about taking cuttings. This bed here is what I'm hoping to use to put absolutely everything we grow during this season together in. And I've also got a great big pot, the kind of pot that you could grow if you've just got a yard or a balcony. Whether you're brand new to gardening or whether you've been doing it for absolutely ages, I really hope that you can grow along with me in this sort of wonderful experiment, really, in just trying to grow loads and loads of plants. And what's more, plants for free. Plants for nout.
Well, Carol will be sharing more of her incredible propagating experience and wisdom when we rejoin her a number of times over the coming months. Last October, I divided one single fern, a Dryopteris felix mass, which I planted some years ago down the Lime Walk, and out of it made 9 new divisions. Now, 2 of them I've planted elsewhere, but I've got 7 left, and you can see they're quite substantial. And I'd all along been thinking they would be ideal for this position along this wall. This is the shadiest part of the garden. That is absolutely north-facing. So for half the year, there's no light here at all, but ferns thrive in cool, dark places. And Dryopteris is very adaptable. Some ferns need it to be wet all the time. Some ferns really need bone dry. Dryopteris will grow in dry shade and it will grow in damp shade. So it's perhaps one of the best ones to start with. But what they won't take is full blaring sun. That's no good. They do need at least half the day in shade. So, let's place them. And in these pots, I've got Dryopteris. And if you've just got a pot, they make a fabulous plant in a shady corner. And as for planting, dig a hole and stick them in. Pop that in, like that. Keep the crown above the soil level. Don't bury it. There's no need to feed it or mulch it if the soil is good. Right, I'll plant the rest. And as I say, I'm looking forward to seeing this sort of rhythm of ferns against the terracotta brick. Quite simple, but I think very effective. Now, when it comes to growing conditions, I don't think you will find any garden in the land that is more different to Longmeadow than that belonging to Jeff Stonebanks, down on the south coast.
Before I expect visitors, I come out in the garden and I walk around it. I pick all the leaves up, all the dead heads off the floor. I always say that I'm like dressing a film set. But I have this picture in my head of how I want that corner to look or that corner to look. So yeah, I like to be in control of what I'm looking at and what I'm doing, and yeah, okay, I'm a control freak. Hi, I'm Jeff. I live here on the south coast between Brighton and Eastbourne. There's nothing between us and the sea, which is a quarter of a mile away. So it's a difficult garden to maintain. The front garden is totally exposed and gets 50, 60 mile-an-hour winds during the height of the winter and the gales and the storms. Where we're sat now in the back garden, it seems quite sheltered on a day like today, but trust me, when the winds blow, it really circulates around this back garden as well. So I get to a point where I no longer buy plants that should work in my coastal environment. I buy plants I like. And sometimes I don't even bother reading what the guidelines are. I put the plant where I want it, and in my world, plants have got two choices, they sink or swim. But if you look after them, they generally will swim. I love these plants in the garden, these buddleias behind me. The one I particularly like is the magenta there. They're a fairly new innovation, and they've been grown primarily to grow in patio pots. But if you do as I've done and put them in the ground, they will grow to about head height, which is perfect for deadheading. And one thing buddleias love is to be deadheaded because they will just keep producing flowers. And in producing flowers, you'll attract more butterflies. The good thing about them also is they're a little bit drought tolerant. And importantly, you cut them right back to almost nothing in the winter and they will come back and grow beautifully year after year. I'm chopping down the flowers that are dead on the phormiums. I leave them because they create dramatic effect during the summer, even though they actually look dead. But once the garden's closed, I cut them down and many more will grow again next year. People that visit say, does your partner help you in the garden? And I have to say, A, he probably wouldn't want to, but B, because I'm a control freak, I like to have a finger in every pie. So it's pointless me saying, go and get somebody else to do this or bring somebody else to do that, because at the end of the day, they probably wouldn't do it right. In amongst this planting here, we've got these beautiful eucomis, commonly called pineapple lilies. I wonder why. They're in two different containers. They come up religiously every summer and produce these stunning displays. I tend to leave them until they've died back and then obviously cut the dead flowers off when they've gone brown and just lift the pots and put them back in the greenhouse for the winter. And they've come back and work wonders every year. The great bonus with having a number of small containers is that you can always have some in reserve. because if something goes over, you can simply lift that container and drop it in somewhere else. A trick I learned from the King when I visited Highgrove a few years ago and was avidly watching some gardeners titivate some pots behind the house, and they didn't look that attractive at the time. They then set about lifting the innards of the urn out and dropping these pots of tulips in. Perfect instant gardening. People often say, you've got so many plants in this garden, do you have any one in particular that have a special meaning for you? And the answer to that is most definitely yes. My Auntie Margaret and my father, Ron, were both keen gardeners. Both passed away, and I inherited a lot of the plants from their garden. One is a fuchsia genii, still in the same pot my aunt planted it in. And adjacent to it is an Empress of Prussia fuchsia that my father bought my mother for their ruby wedding anniversary many moons ago. Just taking some cuttings of this fuchsia. I've cut it off at the node there, and I've torn the leaves off the lower part. Now cutting the flowers off, and then cut the top off, so we've just got the leaves and the stem. Then I'm going to cut it off at the node, dip it in some water, dip it into the rooting powder, shake the excess off, and then drop it into some potting compost and firm it in. Having firmed it in, just give it a little bit of water to start it off. Hey presto, 3 new plants for next spring. I've sold hundreds of fuchsias that way. There must be thousands of Dad's Empress of Prussia sprouting all over Sussex and beyond. People often say to me when they see the garden, did I know much about gardening? But to be honest, no. I'd never really gardened at all before we came here. There's no expert on your garden other than yourself. It's no good listening to what others say or looking at books because they're textbook answers. You are the only expert of your own garden, and sometimes you just have to take a chance. Having a bit of courage and just going for it is what I would recommend to any gardener.
I do so agree with Jeff in his basic philosophy that plants have to sink or swim. And by that, I take him to mean what we do here is if they want to be here and they're happy, great. If they don't try and grow them, because nobody can grow everything. On the other hand, I also agree with him is give it a go. Now, Jeff's fuchsias were looking great, and of course that was filmed last summer when they were in full flower. My fuchsias have spent the winter here in the wooden greenhouse where they've been kept frost-free and also dry. Now, though, they're starting to grow, so they're going to need water, they're going to need feed, and they're going to need a little bit of pruning. You can see here little shoots starting to appear on the stems, and what we need to do to stop it getting too leggy and to get nice, vigorous new growth is cut it back. And I'm cutting just above a pair of leaves. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is not a science. I'm just doing this by eye, trying to get a nice compact shape. So don't be frightened of cutting off what looks like healthy, vigorous new growth. Now, having done that, I know that the new growth won't carry any flowers at all for at least 8 weeks. All we want is nice, strong, new shoots, healthy leaves, the roots to grow, and they don't like blazing sunshine. They like good drainage, but humid air. So keep them out the wind, keep them out the sun, and be patient once you cut them back. If you're growing fuchsias outside in your garden, wait a little bit before you start tidying them up, because obviously in the cold weather, they will be a bit slower, and you could leave it, I think, for another 2 or 3 weeks, depending where you live in the country, until you see the new growth appear, then cut it back. Now, I will do all my fuchsias, but at the same time in here, I've got pelargoniums. And to get a compact pelargonium with lots of new shoots and therefore lots of flowers, you do need to be brave and cut back. So in this case, for example, I could cut back there, and I think here, And then the other thing you need to do, having done any cutting back you want, is to water and feed. So give it a drink. And what I do at this time of year is let it soak through and then give them a liquid feed, because the compost will be very dry and you want it to absorb a little bit of moisture, and actually it will then absorb the liquid feed all the better. Otherwise the liquid feed has a tendency just to run straight throughout the bottom. So once you see it coming out, and you can see it's coming out of the drainage hole there, I've got a seaweed feed here, and then these can be fed weekly and watered weekly. If you think they need repotting, now is the time to do it. Do it before you water them. And don't be tempted into going into too big a pot. A rule of thumb is you don't need more than 1 inch of fresh compost around the outside of the existing root ball and compost. Now, that's my jobs. Here are yours for the weekend. One of the best things you can do for your garden at this time of year is to mulch any bare soil in your borders. It doesn't really matter what you use as long as it's organic, and I'm using bark around the grasses. But whatever you choose to use, be generous. Put a thick layer, because this will not only suppress weeds, but keep in moisture. Broad beans are one of the few vegetable seeds that will germinate while the soil is still cool, so sow them now. I'm sowing mine in a raised bed in a grid, with each bean about 9 inches apart. But you can sow them in double rows. Push the beans about 1 inch or 2 into the soil, rake them over lightly, and they should start to appear in a few weeks' time. If you grow strawberries, now is the time to give them some attention after a long winter. Cut back any dead growth and remove any faded or old leaves. And then mulch them, preferably using garden compost or a good quality soil improver. This should set them up for summer. The dual garden doesn't have a lot of colour in it at the moment, but it does have a real sense of change. Now it's coming back to life. Obviously you've got all the allium foliage and the tulips. You have the Iris sibirica, which sort of almost looks like grass coming through, and then the silvery fronds of the cardoons. And you know that before long, the growth will be enormous, because in midsummer, you can't see through at all. But just for a few weeks now, there's a real sense that everything is just bubbling under the surface and it's going to explode. That's it for today. And of course, next weekend is Easter weekend, very early this year. So we will be back here at Longmeadow at 8 o'clock next Friday, which is Good Friday. And I'll see you then. Bye-bye.